Continuing, Chapter 1, Operating in the Courts of Heaven. This is why Jesus was speaking this parable. He was unlocking a secret that prayer is activity in a courtroom. When the widow wanted justice, she went to the courtroom and not into the battlefield. She realized she didn't need to march onto a battlefield and yell at her adversary. She simply needed a verdict from the court. In fact, she didn't even address her adversary. This parable never mentions her even speaking to him. She spoke only to the judge. When this widow kept on with her pleas before the unjust judge, he finally gave in and granted her request, and she received a just verdict in her situation. She understood that if the judge rendered a legal verdict, any power of the adversary was demolished, and she won. Once this was in place, her adversary had to bow the knee to the rendering of the court. This is for us as well. Any adversary in the spirit realm that is resisting God's kingdom's purpose for us will bow the knee to the verdicts from the court of heaven. We have no need to yell, scream, or even curse our foe. All we need is a legal precedent based on a verdict from heaven, and the fight is over. We then simply put into place the verdict that has been set down. This is where decrees come, but only after legality has been established. I will get into this more in a later chapter. I want us to notice specifically Luke 18:18. I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. Luke 18:8. I have watched and witnessed that when I moved off the battlefield and into the courtroom of heaven, answers came for me that I had prayed years for. All my warring, crying, yelling, and petitioning had not brought answers from heaven. But when I began to learn how to navigate the courts of heaven, what had never happened before happened immediately and quickly. My adversaries were silenced, and I was avenged speedily. As with most families, my family does not live in a perfect world. I hope yours does, but mine doesn't. Mary and I have raised 6 children. I have said often that while they were growing up, we were never bored. We were confused at times, but never bored. There was definitely plenty of activity and life in our home. We have watched all of the children transition into great adults. They all love God, fear Him and honor Mary and I greatly. That has not been without periods of wrong choices as they struggle to discover their identities. In fact, one of our daughters went through a very short period of rebellious activity. That period was long enough to, however, end with her being pregnant without being married. I love what a prophet friend of mine says. He declares, "It is not a sin to be pregnant without being married." This statement usually stuns people. After all, how could any legitimate man or woman of God say such a thing? He then continues, "The sin was the fornication that led to the pregnancy. The baby in the womb is not a sin." I love it. Not because of any justification in our own personal circumstance, but because it strikes at the malicious judgment that is often in the church concerning such situations. God is the God of forgiveness and mercy. Whether it was our daughter or someone else's, there is forgiveness and redemption for pregnancy outside of marriage. After the repentance, then there is a joyous expectation of the child that will be born into the earth, completely blessed by our loving God, who is our Father. This is what happened in our family. Our grandson is a joy to our lives and the whole clan. We cannot imagine life without him. One of the first places where I saw activity in the courts of heaven being a verdict was concerning this grandson. The biological father in this situation decided after 5 years that he wanted to be back in the child's life. There had been no support of any kind from him up until then. The character of the father was not one which we felt would be a good influence on our grandson. He had a criminal record, several DUIs, plus a couple of assault convictions. It was not a good situation. Yet here he was, wanting visitation rights and the right to take our grandson out of state for extended visitations with his family. Our daughter was greatly perplexed and worried about what the natural courts would do. It came time for the case to go before a judge. The attorney for my daughter was guarded because he didn't know which way the judge would go. We live in Colorado Springs, and it is a military town. Cases such as these go before the courts regularly because the people are in the military. They get divorced, and one party will be transferred to other regions around the world. It is not uncommon for the courts to allow visitation rights so a child can be taken out of state and be with the other parent. This is what my daughter thought would happen, and this was of great concern to her. But she didn't know her dad, me, had discovered a higher court that could be appealed to. On the day of the heavenly earthly court date, I went to the courts of heaven, silenced the accuser, we will get to that later, and petitioned the court of heaven for a verdict and judgment in our daughter and ultimately in our grandson's favor. I had some other prophetic people help me sense what was going on. I very clearly heard and discerned that the court of heaven had rendered the verdict we were looking for. My daughter went to the earthly court later that morning. As the judge listened to the evidence, he prepared to render his judgment. He then spoke to the biological father and said these words, "Young man, here's what we are going to do. Whatever the mother wants us to do is what we're going to do. Are you fine with this?" My daughter, her attorney, and the biological father were flabbergasted. My daughter's attorney actually took her outside and asked her if she realized what had just happened. He said that this never happens and was beside himself at the turn of events. The reason for this activity and verdict was because a higher court, the court of heaven, had already rendered a verdict, and the earthly court simply played it out. I have watched this happen in several actual court cases. I have also seen results like this over and over as we have asked heaven to render verdicts to set kingdom purposes in place. This principle and awareness is a very powerful thing. The more we learn to present our case in the courts of heaven, the more we get legal precedences in place that allow us victory on the battlefield every time. Without it, we lose and suffer the consequences. Let's learn to go to court.